The Silence of Kalar, India, 1988, Kalar, Tamil Nadu. The wind rustled through the neem trees that lined the cracked concrete fence of the modest government school in Kalar. The bell tower, a rusting iron contraption that often startled birds more than it summoned children, had just rung for the morning assembly. But this was no ordinary day. Inside Room 9, the walls bore posters of forgotten dreams, hand-drawn maps of India, math multiplication tables, and portraits of freedom fighters whose eyes seemed to silently watch. 29 students were seated, their backs straight, facing the chalkboard, their textbooks closed on their desks. They were awaiting their favorite teacher, Mr. Shastri. Among them sat a lanky, curious boy with a spark in his eyes, Sundar Pichai, 12 years old, with a mind that danced between logic and wonder. He loved machines, especially the school's old radio, which he had managed to repair using spare wires from a broken ceiling fan. His teachers admired him not only for his brilliance, but for his quiet kindness. But today, something was off. The sky outside was painted in an unusual hue, partly crimson, partly ash. It was as though the sun was caught between dawn and dusk, indecisive in its rise or fall. Birds had vanished. Dogs refused to bark. Even the usual buzz of village chatter had dulled to a hush, as if the entire world was holding its breath. And then they vanished. Without a sound, without a flash, without even the drama of chaos, Room 9 went empty. No one saw it. No one heard it. One moment the class was there. The next, gone. 25 years later, Mountain View, California. The glass windows of the Google headquarters gleamed in the Californian sun. Sundar Pichai, now a top executive at Google, stood at his desk, staring blankly at an old photograph in his hands, one that he always kept hidden in a drawer. It was a faded class photo. Room 9, Kalar Government High School, 1988. He gently touched the image, brushing his thumb across the faces of his classmates. He was the only one who had escaped that day. Not because he was special, but because he was late. That morning, Sundar had been delayed by an old woman outside the temple. She was blind, her sari torn, sitting near the banyan tree. She had asked him to help her find her son. That delay had saved his life, or perhaps condemned him. The survivor's guilt. For decades, Sundar had buried the memories. He had risen through the ranks at Google, his mind a maze of algorithms and AI. But at night, the silence of Kalar would return. He would dream of the strange sky, of empty desks, of a faint humming sound that no one else could hear. Until one day, a mysterious package arrived at his office. There was no return address, only a simple note. They remember you. They remember that you were late. Inside the package was the school's old radio, the same one he had fixed, except now it was playing a voice, faint, distorted, repeating over and over in Tamil. Room 9 is still waiting. The journey back, haunted by the message, Sundar took a sudden leave of absence. He told no one where he was going. He boarded a flight to Chennai, and from there took a hired jeep through winding, forgotten roads, back to Kalar. But the village was not how he remembered it. The roads were overgrown. The school was boarded up. No one seemed to recall Room 9 or the vanished students. It was as though the village had collectively forgotten, or chosen to forget. Only one man remembered, Ravi, the school's old janitor, now a shriveled figure living in a tin shack on the edge of the river. When Sundar approached him, Ravi didn't speak at first. He just looked at the radio Sundar held in his hands and began to cry. They never left, Ravi whispered, shaking. They're caught in the in-between, a place we cannot see, unless we remember. What happened that day? According to Ravi, the government sent officials to investigate after the disappearance. But no bodies were found, no clues, nothing. Eventually, the school was closed. The village was told to stay silent. But Ravi, he had seen something. He claimed there was a moment, a flash of light, too quick to see, but too bright to ignore, and a sound like 1,000 voices speaking in reverse. He believed the class had been taken by something ancient, not aliens, not ghosts, something else, an echo of time, a fold in reality, a test. The old woman and the key. Ravi took Sundar to the temple, the very spot where Sundar had met the blind woman 25 years ago. To his astonishment, the banyan tree was still there, and under it lay a mirror, half buried in soil. When Sundar touched it, the radio buzzed violently, and a new voice emerged. "Welcome back, Sundar. The trial begins now." And then, darkness, the trial of memory. When Sundar awoke, the world around him had changed. The sounds of crickets and temple bells were gone, replaced by a vast and unnatural silence, so complete, so thick, that it pressed against his ears like a vacuum. The sky above no longer bore the hue of familiar blue, but an eerie metallic gray that shimmered like liquid steel. The banyan tree under which he had stood had vanished, as had the entire landscape around him. In its place was a desolate plain, endless in every direction, with no sun, no shadows, and no sign of time's passage. He clutched the radio still in his hands, though now it was cold, lifeless, its once glowing dial faded into black glass. What had moments before been an old man's shack and a sacred temple was now nothing but dust on a floor of forgotten space. He stood, breathing in air that didn't quite feel like air. His thoughts clung to the final message the radio had spoken before the blackout. "Welcome back, Sundar. The trial begins now." What trial? And who was behind this? Could it be a hallucination, a cruel prank played by his memory, and the weight of survivor's guilt? But no, this place, as unreal as it appeared, felt too consistent, too controlled, to be a figment of his imagination. If anything, it felt designed. As he began walking across the shifting terrain, the ground beneath his feet changed in texture with each step. Dirt became sand, sand became ash, ash became glass, reflecting fragments of moments from his past. In one reflection, he saw himself as a child, sitting beside his mother, watching her patch an old sari by lantern light. In another, he saw his father arguing with a school inspector, refusing to pay a bribe for Sundar's promotion to a better class. These were memories he hadn't summoned in decades, yet here they were, looping silently beneath his feet like reels of forgotten film. The further he walked, the more vivid the scenes became, until at last, a structure began to form on the horizon. A school building, decayed and crumbling, but unmistakably familiar. It was Kalar Government High School, or at least some spectral facsimile of it. Room 9 stood at the end of a long corridor, the door slightly ajar, as if waiting for him. The silence was broken only by the distant clicking of a chalk piece on blackboard, rhythmic, slow, deliberate. He stepped inside. The classroom was exactly as he remembered it on the day of the disappearance, except now every desk was covered in dust. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling fans, and on the blackboard, someone had scrawled in blood-red chalk, "The memory of absence is stronger than the presence of memory." At the front of the room, seated behind the teacher's desk, was a figure wrapped in shadow. It spoke without lifting its head, its voice neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It was, instead, like the echo of a voice remembered from a dream. "You left them behind," it said, "not by choice, but you remained, and they remained too, in the fold." Sundar wanted to protest, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel something strange pressing against his heart, not just guilt, but a deep ancient mourning, like something sacred had been torn away long ago. "What do you mean the fold?" he finally asked, his voice more a whisper than speech. The figure stood, and in its place appeared a vision. 29 children, suspended in still air like statues, their eyes open, unmoving, frozen mid-laughter, mid-thought, mid-breath. Around them, Time flowed like oil underwater, slow and uncertain. They were caught in a temporal fracture, the voice explained. A disruption in the pattern of causality. A crack in what your kind calls reality. You call it a tragedy. But here, it is an experiment. Sundar stepped forward, his eyes wide in disbelief. But why? Why them? Why my class? They were just children. All of you were, the voice replied. But your class was unique. Not because of intelligence or behavior or any gift. You existed during a convergence, the crossing of two timelines. One destined to perish in silence, the other to change the world. You were the pivot. It was then that Sundar understood. His absence that day had not been a coincidence. The blind woman, the delay, the strange sky, it was all orchestrated. Not by chance, but by design. He had been chosen, or rather, preserved, to carry something forward. Perhaps not a burden, but a seed. The room darkened, and the walls began to pulse like a living organism. From behind him, he heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. He turned, and for the first time in 25 years, he saw Anjali, his closest friend from room 9. She had once sat beside him every day, shared her lunch of lemon rice and green mango slices with salt, helped him stitch together model airplanes with old wires. But now she looked the same as she had in 1988. Not aged, not older. Her eyes met his, and tears formed instantly in her eyes. "You came back," she said, her voice cracking. We thought you'd forgotten us." Sundar rushed forward, but she held up a hand. "You can't touch me. Not yet. Not until the trial is complete." "What is the trial?" he asked again, more urgently now. She looked past him, at the chalkboard. A new message had appeared, pulsing faintly. "To restore the past, you must surrender the future. You have to remember all of us," she said. "Every single one. Their names, their voices, their dreams. Only then can we be released. Only then can we return." Sundar's heart dropped. He could remember faces, yes. Moments, yes. But names. Some had faded into fog. Could he truly recover all of them after so many years? Could memory alone resurrect the past? Anjali began to fade, her image flickering like static. "You have one chance. Fail, and we remain lost forever." The classroom dissolved around him. He found himself in the schoolyard, now cloaked in night. The radio came alive again in his hands, now glowing with green light. A voice, a different one, deeper, older, began to speak. "The trial of memory has begun. Name them, remember them, feel them." And as the wind began to howl, as the earth cracked beneath his feet, and visions of childhood flooded his senses, Sundar realized this was more than a test of memory. It was a test of humanity itself. Names beneath the dust. The night around Sundar was not like any earthly darkness he had ever known. It was not merely the absence of light, but the presence of something else, dense, conscious, and observing. It pressed in from all sides, as though the very fabric of the forgotten world was alive and listening. Beneath his feet, the ground pulsed faintly with dim amber veins that flowed like liquid fire under black glass. Somewhere in the distance, bells chimed, not in celebration, but like mournful echoes carried across an ancient sea of memory. The radio in his hands glowed brighter, its dial shifting and tuning itself until a new frequency crackled to life. And then he heard it. A voice. Small, childlike, terrified. "Do you remember me, Sundar? My name was Karthik. I used to sit in the front row. I was afraid of thunder, remember? You once gave me your umbrella when the storm caught us at the bus stop." Sundar's breath caught in his chest. That memory had been sealed away, buried beneath decades of logic, leadership, and the demands of modern life. But now it came rushing back in full color. A trembling boy with wide eyes and a stutter, gripping Sundar's old torn umbrella. trying to hide tears as the monsoon thundered around them. Yes, Sundar whispered aloud. Karthik. As soon as the name escaped his lips, the wind shifted, the earth cracked beneath him, and a ripple of golden light spread outward. A small sphere rose from the ground, pale, flickering like a soul in limbo, and vanished into the sky. The radio crackled again. That is one, the voice declared. Only 28 remain. A flood of emotions hit Sundar like a tidal wave. 28, each a soul, each a story, each one tethered to him by a thread of memory that had been frayed by time. He wasn't simply remembering names. He was resurrecting meaning, reaching into the past not as a place of nostalgia, but as a battlefield where forgotten lives waited for their verdict. And now the battlefield was awakening. As he took a step forward, the world reshaped itself around him. The schoolyard transformed into a vast hall of mirrors, each mirror a different size and shape, some cracked, some fogged, some glowing. Every mirror pulsed with faint movement, figures just beyond the surface, children frozen mid-laughter, mid-tears, mid-conversation. They looked out at him, not with judgment, but with longing. Then one mirror shimmered brighter than the rest. He approached it, unsure, heart pounding. In the reflection, he saw a girl with thick braids and a shy smile, clutching the dog-eared poetry book. Meena, Sundar said aloud, almost involuntarily. You wrote poems and passed them to me during English class. You said you wanted to write a book one day. The mirror cracked open, light surged, and the figure vanished into the heavens just like Karthik. Another name, another memory, another life redeemed. 27 remain. The voice intoned once more, now sterner. But with each name remembered, the trial grew harder. The world around him morphed faster, more violently. The mirrors now floated midair, whirling around him like planets orbiting a collapsing sun. They whispered, they wept, they sang lullabies and prayers. The voices were desperate, not malevolent, but insistent, like a tide begging to return to the shore. And then the memories began to trick him. The next reflection showed a boy, laughing as he balanced a cricket bat on his shoulder, but Sundar hesitated. Was it Ramesh, or was that Arvind? Two boys, both friends, both lost. But time had rubbed the edges off his memories like water on stone. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to reach into the core of what he remembered, not the face, but the feeling. He remembered the smell of chalk and earth. He remembered one of them cutting his palm on a rusted nail and hiding it so he wouldn't be sent home. He remembered binding the wound with his own handkerchief. That was Ramesh. Ramesh, he declared. The mirror shattered. Another light escaped. Another name, another life restored. But then came the shift, the trial of pain. The world darkened again, and a deep rumble echoed all around him. This time, the mirrors didn't show students. They showed himself. Over the years, a young Sundar with curious eyes, reading a tattered physics book under a street lamp. A college Sundar, sleep-deprived but dreaming. Sundar at Google, presenting, leading, inspiring. And then, Sundar, turning away from a letter from Kalar. A reunion he had ignored. A message from Ravi that he had never answered. A photograph he had looked at one night in his California home and turned face down. He had spent his life building the future, yes, but part of him had always known he was building it atop a graveyard of the past. And now, the past demanded to be seen, to be honored. He dropped to his knees. I was afraid, he whispered. I thought remembering would destroy me. The wind howled again. The mirrors slowed. One final figure appeared, Mr. Shastri, their teacher. The man who had believed in Sundar when no one else did. The man who had stayed behind to watch over the class on that fateful day. Do not be afraid of pain, his voice echoed through the void. It is the doorway through which love returns. A tear rolled down Sundar's cheek. He had lived his life in the belief that success came from forgetting pain, from moving forward without looking back. But now he understood. To move forward with meaning, one must first remember the lost, carry them, honor them, not as burdens, but as the foundation of all that is beautiful. He stood up, and name by name, one after another, he called them. Lakshmi, who dreamed of being a scientist. Naveen, who loved to draw comic books. Deepa, who never spoke, but whose eyes held galaxies. Muthu, who beatboxed with just his lips and made the class laugh. With every name, a light rose. The mirrors cracked, then burst, releasing each soul. Some thanked him. Some wept. One simply smiled and vanished. And finally, there were none left. The trial was over. The world began to fade once more, the darkness lifting like a curtain at the end of a long, sorrowful play. The barren field returned. The banyan tree grew back before his eyes, its leaves shining like emerald fire. The radio in his hand crumbled into dust, and in its place, a single lotus flower bloomed. A voice, clear now, kind, spoke one final time. You remembered them, and by doing so, you remembered yourself. Sundar awoke again beneath the banyan tree, the sun rising over Kallar as if no time had passed. In his hand was the photograph. Room 9, 1988. But this time, every face was clear, every name engraved beneath each smile. And beside him lay a book, bound in leather, ancient and unmarked. He opened it and saw the title, The Trial of Memory. Page 1 was blank. The rest was waiting to be written. The Book of Forgotten Fire. When Sundar Pichai awoke the next morning, the village of Kallar shimmered in an unfamiliar calm, as if it too had just emerged from a dream. The banyan tree swayed gently under a golden sun, the birds were singing again, and the scent of wet soil drifted softly across the breeze. Everything looked as it once had in his youth, but with a subtle difference. Every corner, every alley, every stone and shadow carried a hush of reverence, like the village itself had remembered something sacred and secret. He sat in the shade of the tree, not moving for several minutes, the leather-bound book still clutched in his hands. Though it was heavy, there were no markings on the cover, no pages filled with words, only a sense of tremendous weight, as if the book carried the breath of lost centuries, the echo of voices long silenced. It was only when he stood up, brushing the dust from his clothes, that he realized something extraordinary. The radio, which had once served as his guide into that fractured world, was gone, completely vanished, not even an imprint on the earth where he'd last seen it. But in his mind, the voices still lingered, not haunting, but present, quiet, watching. He could still hear Karthik's timid laugh, Meena's gentle whisper, Ramesh's defiant smirk. He could still hear the children of Room 9, as if they were walking just a step behind him, not trapped in a fold of time, but free at last, liberated by the fragile miracle of being remembered. That night, Sundar sat alone in the home where he had once grown up. It had been preserved by a distant relative, walls now faded, furniture sparse, but somehow untouched by the storms of time. The book lay open on the desk, blank page after blank page stretching before him like an invitation or a warning. He stared at it for hours, not knowing where to begin, not knowing how to begin. This was no ordinary journal. Every time he touched the pages, flickers of memories rushed up from the paper into his skin, not his memories alone, but those of the children, their unspoken dreams, unfinished thoughts, the fragments of stories never told. Each blank page was not empty. It was waiting. Waiting for truth, for legacy, for the courage to speak on behalf of those who could not. For days, he remained in Kallar, speaking to no one, stepping out only to walk the familiar paths of the village. He would walk to the school, now locked and overgrown, place his hand on the rusted gate, and feel the weight of absence hanging in the air like an echo without a source. He spoke aloud to the empty walls, not to summon ghosts, but to remind the universe that memory mattered, that it should be spoken, out loud, like a prayer. And slowly, something within him shifted. The Sundar who had left Kalar all those years ago as a boy chasing light-speed dreams had returned as a man who now understood that the past is not a chain, but a compass. Then one morning, he wrote the first sentence in the book. This is the story of Room 9, not as it ended, but as it must now be remembered. The ink sank deep into the paper, and he watched as the lines shimmered for a moment, then faded into the page as though absorbed by the very fabric of the book. But the words weren't lost. He could feel them pulsing softly beneath the surface, alive. As he wrote, more memories poured into him, not just the specific details of names and faces, but textures, scents, sounds. The heat of the Tamil summer burning through tin roofs, the muffled giggles during Hindi class, the sting of chalk dust in the eyes. He wrote not to preserve history, but to awaken it, to reanimate it, to give Room 9 a second chance at being seen, not by investigators or reporters or institutions, but by humanity. And with each chapter, a strange thing began to happen. The village began to change. Children who had once ignored the crumbling school now lingered near its gates, asking questions. Elders who had denied remembering the disappearance began to talk again, cautiously, softly, but honestly. Even Ravi, the old janitor, now came to sit beside Sundar every evening under the banyan tree, not to speak, but just to be near someone who remembered. Memory, once a burden, had become a bridge. Sundar's book grew page by page, not with fiction or myth, but with voices once silenced. He didn't publish it. Not yet. It wasn't time. Instead, he digitized each chapter, encrypted them, and placed them into a private vault within Google's deepest archives. He named the project Agni Rekha, the line of fire, not because it burned, but because it illuminated, a line that could never again be crossed in silence. It was then, and only then, that Sundar returned to California. But he was no longer the same man who had left. He stood at the helm of innovation, yes, still spoke in keynotes and conferences, still navigated boardrooms and algorithms. But inside him now burned a new philosophy, one born not of ambition, but of accountability. Every product, every policy, every line of code he now influenced was filtered through the silent question that Room 9 had taught him. Are we building a world where everyone is remembered, or are we merely racing toward a future where the forgotten are buried even deeper? He introduced changes, quiet at first, a shift in the ethics board, an investment in digital memory preservation for schools in underdeveloped regions, a new team, quietly formed under a humanistic AI initiative, tasked with using machine learning not just to predict behavior, but to recover lost cultural stories. Most thought it was a side project, a public relations gesture, but Sundar knew better. It was the beginning of something larger, a return to something deeper. And yet, the story wasn't finished. One night, months later, Sundar returned to his office late, long after the lights had dimmed and the world had fallen asleep. He opened the encrypted vault, accessed the Agni Rekha archive, and scrolled to the final page of the digital manuscript. It was blank, but as he stared, a new line appeared, typed not by his hand, but by something unseen. There is one more trial. He stared at the screen, heart slowing, breath held. Beneath that line, one more message appeared. Return to the classroom. One soul remains. And then the lights in his office flickered. The screen went black. And Sundar Pichai knew. The past was not finished with him yet. The forgotten one. The hum of the private jet was low and constant, but Sundar barely registered it. He sat by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the clouds, the faint glow of stars reflected in the glass, but his thoughts were far from the night sky. It had been 7 months since he returned from Kalar with the Book of Forgotten Fire. 7 months since he had begun the quiet work of restoring memory to systems designed to erase it. and 7 months since the screen in his office had gone black, leaving him with a single line of text that had haunted him in every breath since. One soul remains. The words had not left his mind, not for a single day. He had tried to reason through them, tried to rationalize what it meant, but he knew this was not logic's domain. This was something older, something the intellect could not unravel. And so he was returning, back to where it all began, back to room 9. When the jet landed at a modest airstrip near Salem, a driver awaited him with a dusty white ambassador car. No one knew why Sundar Pichai was back in Tamil Nadu. He hadn't alerted the press, hadn't even told his family. This was not a return home. This was a descent into the one question that remained unanswered, not just in the mystery of the vanished class, but within himself. The car creaked and groaned as it made its way through winding village roads, past sleeping fields and silent hills, until at last the outline of Calor emerged against the horizon. Still modest, still humble, but now infused with something sacred. The village, having lived in silence for decades, had begun to stir awake after his last visit. People remembered. They no longer whispered the name of Room 9 as a curse. They spoke of it with awe, with sorrow, with reverence, as something that had once wounded them, and now, perhaps, had healed them in some way. But the healing was not yet complete. As the car stopped before the gates of the school, Sundar stepped out into the cool pre-dawn air. The building loomed ahead, its facade worn and broken in places, yet undeniably standing, a stubborn monument to a day that had fractured time itself. He carried nothing with him now. Not the book, not the radio, not a bag. Only the weight of what he still had to uncover. He opened the rusted gate slowly, its hinges moaning like reluctant sentries, and walked across the schoolyard toward the door of room 9. This time, no visions accompanied him. No illusions, no apparitions, just the cold, hard silence of the earth. He reached for the door handle, still the same chipped iron, and pushed gently. The door opened without resistance, and inside was a single desk. The room was otherwise empty. No blackboard, no chairs, no dust-covered memories or spectral mirrors. Just one desk, polished, pristine, placed in the center of the room like a shrine. Atop it, a folded piece of paper. Nothing else. He approached slowly, heart tightening with each step, as if every inch closer drew him nearer to a truth too powerful to name. He picked up the paper with trembling hands and unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his own. You forgot one. The most important one. The one who never sat in the photo. The one who stayed behind. Look closer. He read it twice, 3 times, then turned, eyes scanning the room. The one who never sat in the photo. The words echoed in his skull like a distant bell. And then the realization hit him like a storm. The teacher, Mr. Shastri. He had remembered the children. He had honored their dreams, named them one by one, but he had forgotten the one man who had been there for all of them. The one who had stayed behind that day, who had locked the doors and waited with the class while Sundar had wandered near the banyan tree. The man who had volunteered to stay late to grade their final papers. The teacher who had believed that every child, no matter how poor, no matter how lost, deserved to be seen. He had been erased from Sundar's memory, not out of malice, but out of trauma, out of necessity, as if the mind, desperate to protect itself, had buried the man who embodied responsibility. Sundar sank to the floor, the letter trembling in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the stillness. "I forgot you, because I couldn't bear to face the one who sacrificed everything." And in that moment, the walls of the classroom began to tremble, not with fury, but with awakening. The room changed again, this time not through illusion or magic, but through something deeper, atonement. Light poured in through the broken windows, though it was still dark outside. The desk cracked open, revealing not a passage, but a photograph. One Sundar had never seen. It was of Mr. Shastri, standing beside the class, his hand resting gently on the shoulder of young Sundar. But his face had been torn away, not by time, but by forgetting, by the absence of grief. Sundar placed his fingers on the torn space, and something miraculous happened. The photograph mended itself. Bit by bit, the face returned, not from memory, but from forgiveness. And just as the image completed, Sundar felt something shift in the air beside him. A presence. Warm, familiar. He turned, and there stood Mr. Shastri. Not spectral, not ghostly, but present. Not the same man, but the same essence. The eyes, steady and kind. The voice, calm. "I never blamed you," Mr. Shastri said softly. "I only waited for you to remember." Tears filled Sundar's eyes. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to kneel, but the teacher shook his head gently. "You've already done what few ever do. You turned back. You remembered. You carried us forward. But now, there is one more thing to carry." Mr. Shastri extended his hand, and in it was a key. A simple brass key. Sundar took it without question, and instantly the vision faded. The classroom was empty once more. The photograph gone. The letter vanished. Only the key remained. And beneath his feet, the floor now revealed a trapdoor. The room beneath the world. The key felt heavier than any metal Sundar had ever held. It wasn't the physical weight, but the sheer density of meaning it carried. As he stood alone in room 9, facing the newly revealed trapdoor at his feet, the silence in the room seemed to lean in, almost breathing with him. For a moment, he did not move, not because he was afraid, but because he understood now. This was not a descent into mystery, but into memory, a memory that belonged not just to him, not just to the 29 souls who had once sat in this room, but to something older, something woven into the very fabric of being human. When he finally turned the key, the lock clicked with a sound that was not mechanical, but final, like a chapter closing, a karmic seal breaking. The trapdoor opened with a breath of cold air and a sigh of ancient dust. What lay beneath was not a tunnel, nor a passage of stone or brick, but a staircase carved from obsidian-like rock that shimmered with symbols he could not read, marks that seemed to move as he looked at them, shifting gently like lines of code made from starlight. He descended slowly, step by step, as the world above faded, and something timeless took its place. The staircase spiraled downward for what felt like hours, and yet the concept of time had begun to unravel here. There was no fatigue in his limbs, no ache, just the rhythmic echo of his footsteps and the strange warmth of the key now pulsing in his hand, as though it was guiding him, whispering to him in vibrations rather than words. Finally, he reached the bottom. He stood at the threshold of a circular chamber that seemed impossibly large, lit not by torches or bulbs, but by a central pillar of pure white light that rose from floor to ceiling. Around the chamber's edge were floating orbs, each orb glowing faintly, suspended in stillness. He recognized them instantly. These were the souls. The 29 he had remembered, released, carried out of the fold with love and honor. And yet, one orb remained dim. It hovered slightly apart from the others, flickering weakly, as if unsure of its place. Sundar approached it, his steps slower now, more reverent than ever before. As he neared the dim orb, it began to pulse in response, not with fear, but with sorrow. A sorrow deeper than death. A sorrow born from erasure. And then it happened. Images flooded his mind, faster than dreams, brighter than memory. But these were not the memories of room 9. They were his, but not the ones he had chosen to keep. He saw himself as a boy, watching his father weep silently one night after selling the family's last gold ornament to pay for his school books. He saw his mother working late into the night, stitching clothes under a weak lantern, just to afford a new pair of shoes he never asked for. He saw the moment he first stepped into Google's campus, not with pride, but with guilt, wondering if he had left too much behind in Kallar. He saw his hesitation to return to India, his growing discomfort with being the symbol, the unbearable weight of expectation. But most of all, he saw the face of the one part of himself he had buried. The dreamer. The one who once believed technology could heal, could unite, could remember. The dim orb flickered once more, and then his own voice spoke. You remembered all of them, but forgot me. He understood now. The final soul was not a classmate, not a teacher. It was him. Not the Sundar the world knew, the executive, the innovator, the strategist. But the inner child, the one who once wanted to build machines to send messages to the moon, who saw every broken radio not as a useless relic, but as a sleeping miracle. The boy who once felt the invisible weight of every missing friend, and carried it without ever knowing how deeply it had shaped him. He had honored their memories, yes, but he had never truly forgiven himself for surviving. And so, here he was. To complete the journey, he would have to remember himself. He knelt before the orb, placed the key gently into its center, and whispered, not words of apology, not logic or philosophy, but a simple truth that cracked something inside him wide open. You never left. I just stopped listening. And in that moment, the chamber changed. The orbs rose, each one shining brighter than the stars. The dim one, his, flared into radiance, joining the others in a spiral of motion that swirled around him like a cosmic dance. The pillar of light surged, pulsing with energy, and then exploded upward, tearing through the stone, through the school, through the sky. An eruption of silent light seen only by those willing to remember. Sundar closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he was back beneath the banyan tree. It was dawn. The sun had just begun to rise, casting the world in golden hues. Birds called. A breeze moved through the leaves like a whispered lullaby. And beside him sat the book of forgotten fire, its pages now filled. Everyone. But on the last page, something had changed. There was no text, just an illustration, a drawing of a classroom with one empty seat and a window opened wide. He stood, the book cradled in his arms, and walked through the village once more, not as a man searching for answers, but as a man who had become one. In the months that followed, Sundar quietly began a global project, far from the headlines, far from the spotlight. A nonprofit dedicated to digital memory preservation for forgotten schools, abandoned classrooms, and orphaned villages. It had no name. It didn't need one. It wasn't about legacy. It was about redemption, a promise paid forward. And though the world continued to change, faster than ever before, some things became clearer. Memory, when carried with compassion, was not a chain. It was a map. It led us not backward, but inward. And somewhere, in every child who opened a dusty textbook in a forgotten corner of the world, a flicker of Room 9 lived on. Because someone remembered. Because someone came back. Because one boy was late. And in that delay, he found eternity.